the State Department and the U.S. government overall appreciates the strong partnership we have with the Syrian American Council. The Council has been, on Syria issues, has been extremely useful to us in terms of providing us up-to-date current information due to the contacts that the Council has both with Syrians on the ground in Syria and with Syrian expatriates around the world, as well as helping us with advice and, frankly, and with our outreach efforts. It's understandable that protesters on the street have become more and more desperate after more than 8 months, now nearly 9 months of peaceful protests have resulted in little concrete, substantive progress in terms of getting the regime to change its actions. The regime is unfortunately very effectively stoking the fears of Syria's minority communities. Syria has, as you all know better than I do, a strong history of shared identity, of nationalism, but the Syrian regime is trying to divide Syria among sects and create the sort of dynamic that perhaps we saw in Lebanon in the late 70s and early 80s. Assad and his inner circle know that they cannot contain peaceful opposition, so they try to assault it with violence and terror. They believe that by creating some of the horrible actions this regime has taken, there are still many Syrians who, no doubt, don't see what the alternative is and wonder what follows after Bashar al-Assad leaves. And this is a question, frankly, that the opposition has to answer and no one else can answer for them. The opposition, one of its most important tasks is to reach out to this undecided majority, especially people in the middle class, especially people in the business class in Aleppo and Damascus, which have still mostly been quiet, and especially to the minority communities who the Assad regime has convinced through fear tactics are going to suffer reprisals if Assad is forced out of power. An orderly transition is still possible for now. The SAC can help in this regard. We hope the SAC will help with the opposition's outreach efforts to the business class, to the urban middle class, to minorities, to share what I hope are your views that Syria is going to be better off with Bashar al-Assad, and the sooner he leaves Syria, the better. We consider that the kind of oppressive environment that Syrians have lived in for the past 4 decades, where, especially in recent years, political discussion within the country has been almost impossible, we have to recognize really how much the opposition has done in terms of organizing, being able to bring together a broad spectrum of dissidents from various ethno-sectarian backgrounds, from different ideologies, around a common goal, which is to remove this corrupt regime from the top of the Syrian state. We have not endorsed any specific opposition group. It's up to the Syrian people to decide who will legitimately represent them. But we do take the SNC very seriously. We do have discussions with the SNC and with other opposition groups as well. And we're urging all the opposition groups, but especially the SNC, since frankly it does seem to enjoy the highest profile. The topic of Syria is consistently raised in Secretary Clinton's and other U.S. government leaders' conversations with Arab leaders. In those conversations, almost all the Arab leaders we talk to now say the same thing. Assad is finished. His rule is coming to an end. He cannot weather this crisis. Change in Syria is now inevitable. Of course, the question is, how long will it take and how many more innocent Syrians will die before his rule ends? The sooner he goes, the better. Our concern is the longer he's able to continue, the more he's going to continue to pull apart Syria through this talk that's creating sectarian rifts and mutual distraction. 3 important Security Council members, China, India, and Brazil, have all shown promising signs in recent weeks that they've decided to change their position, especially as they've seen the region change its position. It's not a comfortable position for Russia or China or India to be standing by President Bashar al-Assad when the Syrian people have turned against him, when the Arab people have turned against him, and when Arab governments have turned against him. Russia continues to present the biggest challenge, but through some recent remarks suggesting the possibility of an internationally backed solution for Syria, and through a recent high-level meeting with the Syrian opposition, Russia is showing some signs that it's at least starting to hedge its bets and question whether continued support for Assad is really in Russia's long-term interest. This is another area where I think the Council can help. Russia really needs to hear, including the Russian embassy in the United States, from as many different parties as possible, that sticking by Bashar al-Assad is not in Russia's interest. Russia clearly does have a long history of military ties with Syria, of economic ties with Syria, and frankly, Syria is one of Russia's last remaining allies in the region. So Russia has reason to be concerned, and of course Russia has a naval facility at Tartus. The opposition the Syrian National Council and others have started to reach out to the Russians to send a message that Russia can still maintain its interest and still maintain bilateral ties with Syria in a post-Assad environment. And I think that's an important message for the Russians to receive. And as we see it, Ambassador Ford's return to Syria cannot be construed as any kind of U.S. reapproach to the Syrian regime. I can state categorically that the U.S. government's relationship with the Bashar al-Assad regime is finished. It's not redeemable. There will be no return of normal relations with Bashar al-Assad. Our position continues to be, and will remain, that Bashar al-Assad must leave eventually. We still seek, ideally, a peaceful Syrian-led political transition that includes the end of Bashar al-Assad's rule and the replacement of the corrupt, incompetent, and violent regime he built with one that responds to the needs of the Syrian people.